listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you 2 hours of truth in a free speech zone every Monday through Friday, right here on Radio Sputnik. It is the show that takes you to the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. We got a great show for you today. We got a first-time guest. Dimitri Babich will be joining us. He's a journalist, born in Moscow, in case you're wondering with a name like Dimitri. Do you know many people born in Philadelphia, where you're from, Rod, named Dimitri? Do you know many American Dimitris? Just asking.
No, not many.
Not many, right. That's my point. If you hear Dimitri, someone was in one of these Twitter spaces I did the other night. If you hear the name Dimitri, probably from that area of the world, just guessing. Then, in the second hour, great friend of the show, this is a name you may know of a little bit more. Do you know any Toms?
I know a lot of Toms.
Right, there's a lot of Toms. Tom Nichols is one of them. Tom Nichols, author. We love having Tom come on the show. Writer. Because he's written also books and articles. But Tom Nichols knows a lot about Philly. We'll be talking about some non-war stuff with Tom. And our special guest co-host today is Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth. That's in the second hour. In the meantime, I got some Russia-Ukraine war news that's just come in the last couple hours. Let's get to that here on The Backstory. Okay, so I would say one of the biggest things is that Russia has announced, Putin announced, they're not going to be exporting things out of the Federation, Russian Federation. I assume that some countries like China will be left out of this, but they're going to stop exporting stuff like fertilizer, like wheat, like nickel, like I think maybe even gas and oil, Rod. We'll see. This sounds serious. Did you see that?
Oh yeah, no, I did see it, and it's just getting worse. Everything's just getting worse.
Right, and I'm just going to point out something, that the sanctions, whatever you think of them, whether you think they're justified, whether you hate Putin's guts, doesn't make any difference. Are the sanctions working in any way to slow things down, these sanctions the U.S. and the West have done, Rod? Have you noticed they've had any effect on anything?
No, and the explanation for what the sanctions are going to do don't even make any sense, so the whole thing's just a S show. You can just fill out the blanks.
It is. And, I was listening to the end of the show By Any Means Necessary right here on Radio Sputnik, hosted by Sean Blackman. And he was on, and Brave called in, who calls in the show sometimes. And Brave said something I think that should be emblazoned onto a pillow or something like that and given to President Biden. I think what he said was, I'm not sure if he said Russia or Putin. I'll assume he said Russia. Quote, Russia ain't playing. That's what he said. And do you know what? That is completely true. Russia ain't playing. And Putin showed by this move, you want to sanction us? Oh, you sanction us? Guess what? We're done exporting. But this could be and you know what? I'm not the only one who made the jokes about this. Did you see who else pulled out of Russia today? They're announced they're closing 850 stores, Rod. McDonald's.
The healthiest restaurant known to man.
Right. McDonald's. And I made the joke. I said basically, I want to thank McDonald's on behalf of, I'm sure, millions of people for trying to make Russia healthier during this difficult period. Because, and then I looked at comments, everybody else had made the same joke too. Is Russia not having McDonald's good or bad for Russia as a people? There's not really we have many health disputes about things like COVID-19, Rod. Is there any dispute about whether McDonald's is health food? Is that something even Fauci says? Who's saying that?
No, I don't think there's any dispute anymore over that.
Now, this is almost as bad as Pornhub announcing they were pulling out. Stop, get your mind out of the gutter. Pornhub is not going to be in Russia anymore. That'll show them to actually look for live people, other that you might have a relationship with. See, that'd be horrible. So a lot of this stuff, I got to say, from one perspective. Oh, and you know what else, though? Pity Russia. Do you pity Russia yet, Rod? Because they also have no CNN.
Oh, my God. Well, then we've done them a favor then.
Are they trying to start an American refugee crisis for people who don't feel much connection to this current culture we live in? Imagine no CNN and no BBC, no lying Western propaganda. Oh, darn. Oh, hecky darn. Now, the other thing, you know what we haven't talked about yet? We didn't talk about it yesterday on the show. This came over the weekend, and there was so much on yesterday's show. We had Dilyana Gatenjeva on the show yesterday. She's the beautiful and brilliant and brave, all the B things. Not that one. Get your mind out of the gutter again. But the brilliant, beautiful, and brave Dilyana was on yesterday from Bulgaria talking about the investigative reporting she's been doing on these bioweapons labs. Let me mention that, because that's the other big thing. Did you see China come out this morning, Rod? And China's going after bioweapons labs. And who can blame them? After the U.S. has been trying to pin the pandemic on China and talking about Chinese bioweapons labs, now it comes out the United States has hundreds of these things all across the world and blanketing, that's what Russia said today, blanketing Ukraine. And by the way, a bioweapons blankets, do you know who knows something about that? Is the Native Americans, Indians. I'm just saying, ask them about smallpox and the blankets. That's a bioweapon. That's an old school Western bioweapon. But China coming out and talking about this, I'm going to tell you, this bioweapon story is not going away. And it starts to put pressure on the United States to explain themselves, not just in Eastern Europe, but to the world. And the fact that China's not dropping it means it's not just Russia saying, nanny, nanny, boo-boo, you're mad about the invasion, so we're going to talk about bioweapons labs. No. In fact, oh, by the way, did you see that Sputnik made the Washington Post yesterday, Rod? Did you catch that article?
Yeah, but on both things. That's why I named the show today about China questioning about the biolabs, and I also saw that article about Sputnik and the radio, and it pretty much calling for this radio station to shut Sputnik down.
Right, that's what they're trying to do. But by the way, if you're listening, 105.5 FM, AM 1390, you'll notice that I clean up nice. Because I was not mentioned, our show was not mentioned in that article, but there was a fabulous picture of me and Garland Nixon back when we used to co-host Fault Lines in the morning here on Radio Sputnik. And I was dressed a little nattier than I tend to dress lately, because I'm doing the show in the afternoon. And I don't want to go put on a tie just to sit here in my bedroom in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You know what I mean, Rod? That'd be a little weird. So, but I do look fabulous in that picture, but they didn't mention us. And I want to point out something about that fat Andrew Feinberg, that liar, that weirdo. Notice in the article when they tried to say that we're full of disinformation here at Radio Sputnik, they didn't. Here's what I would have done. If I was an honest journalist, first off, I wouldn't be working at the Washington Post. But if I were an honest journalist, I'd say, Radio Sputnik is providing disinformation. For instance, I would say, like on last Thursday's show, they said this thing, and it's not true. And here's the proof. Even Russia admits it's not true. So why Sputnik saying it? But they can't do that because we tell the truth here, period. And we let people talk. We're a free speech zone. I'll say that again. We are a free speech zone. And they want to shut us down because we're a free speech zone and because we tell the truth. So notice what they did in that article, Rod. The Washington Post, once they got to the part accusing us of lying, then they went to a quote from a guy who hasn't worked at Sputnik in about 4 years, this guy Andrew Feinberg. Did you notice that?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely did. I was reading it to see what they're gonna criticize us about, and I guess the biggest criticism is that we talked about aliens.
Right. And by the way, do you know who else has talked about aliens? The U.S. government. Remember they did a whole, they had multiple announcements and stuff like that. So if they're nuts, we're nuts. Sorry, it's in the news cycle. They also said we point out things that are bad in America. Sort of like, let me think, the Washington Post. Sure, they did it more when Donald Trump was president, but they still do it a bit because that's called the news. No, let me do it. Here, I'll do the happy news. Should I do it? I'll try it NPR style, NPR happy news. Great news today in the United States of America as gas prices approach $5 a gallon. Yay. You see what I'm saying, Rod? It's hard to make that headline. I did a question on Twitter. I asked how many people are seeing $4.50 a gallon gas. And a lot of people wrote back immediately and said, yeah, we got $4.50 here, $4.57. And some people were like, we got $5.50. And then some of those foreigners, like over in Germany, they're like, no, it's like $7 a gallon here. So count your blessings. Where's gas around where you are right now, Rod?
Right above $4.
So I know we should do happy news on that. Hey, just think how great it is for the environment that we have expensive gas prices. But music's playing, and we got Dimitri coming up, Dimitri Babich, joining us for the first time, talking about the Russia-Ukraine war and about the Middle Eastern fighters. He knows a thing or two about the Middle East. We'll talk to Dimitri right after this short break on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back here on Radio Sputnik, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Despite the best efforts of the Washington Post, we're still on AM and FM radio right here in D.C. and all over the damn internet. Joining us now, first-time guests. We've had some brilliant guests lately. Dilyana Gaten-Java yesterday. Today, we're joined by the relatively easy to pronounce Dimitri Babich. Dimitri, how you doing today? Thanks for joining us.
Doing fine. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks very much for coming on. May I ask what part of the world you're in right now? I'm sure it's somewhere later. I know you cover the EU, Russia issues, also the Middle East. What part of the world, if you wanted to say broadly, Europe? I don't need an address or anything.
I'm in Moscow right now because the skies of the EU countries are closed for Russia. And I think one of the most interesting places to be in the world right now is Moscow. Ukraine is also interesting and dramatic, and I visited that country many times. I lived there for some time. So believe me, everyone here understands the seriousness of the problem. There is no jingoist spirit. There is a very solemn attitude. We understand that war is a serious business. War is a 19th century method of resolving problems. But when you are faced with 17th century hatred, and this is exactly what we have been hearing from the Ukrainian regime in the last 8 years since they ousted the legally elected President Yanukovych, that was 17th century hatred. And what is very important for Americans to understand is that the war has been going on there for 8 years. It actually started not in Crimea, not in Donbass. It started in Kiev when the legally elected president was ousted with 40 policemen killed, hundreds maimed, insurgents getting inside the parliament, and the parliament immediately started voting in a very different way. And, a whole political landscape of Ukraine changed at that moment. So Russia has got a hostile state of 40 million people right next to Moscow, basically 300 kilometers from Moscow. And this situation, it was a situation of the war. I mean, Americans might think that Russians do not notice how, for example, the Congress discussed why didn't Trump send on time the snipers' rifles to Ukraine. Well, Americans might not notice it, but these sniper rifles were actually maiming and killing ethnically Russian people in the east of Ukraine, in the middle of the night. Can you imagine anything more terrible? Wasn't it a war? It was a war. So what's going on now is the continuation of that war, not a new war started.
Well, Dimitri, first off, we're glad you're safe and sound. We were worried you might starve to death because there's no McDonald's in Russia anymore. So you're doing okay, right? You're not going to faint or anything, correct? You're not having a Big Mac hangover. Go ahead.
2 hours ago, I visited McDonald's, and me and my wife, we brought sandwiches back home. My daughter is going to eat them tomorrow for breakfast. So it is still working. It's hard for me to imagine how it would leave. But if it leaves, the difference with the Soviet Union is that Russia is a market economy. We have a market economy already. So if McDonald's leaves, something like Mark Ivan or Mark Natasha will replace it in a matter of weeks, maybe months.
Right, yeah, probably weeks, because if they close all the McDonald's, which they're threatening to, Now, but let me ask you this, because I know you know the Middle East, and let me push back on one thing you said. You said this is a 17th century thing. Let me point out we've now got a 14th century problem because these fighters from Syria have come in to show their solidarity with Ukraine. And these are al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda fighters. So now we've got the Salafi fighters, the jihadists, the head choppers coming into Ukraine. That should tell people something. What do you know about, do you know anything about that? Because I know you covered Middle Eastern stuff, Dimitri.
Yes, I mean, it's big news in Russia, too. The Ukrainian foreign minister, Dmitry Kuleba, has just said they were going to have about 20,000 foreign mercenaries coming to Ukraine to help the government troops fight Russians. Well, not only from the Middle East, but also from Georgia, even from Belarus. You know, there are lots of people in various countries who hate Russia. So the Ukrainian government is inviting them all. But the problem is these people may destroy Ukraine because they're dangerous people. And how can you ask them to fight Russians if for about 50% of the population of Ukraine, Russian is their native language? So if these people hate Russians, or if they hate anyone speaking Russian, they may be dangerous for the population on the territory still controlled by the Ukrainian government. Well, this is again, we see some very irresponsible and inconsequential attitude from the Western governments which supported this move. Let me remind you that when the war in Donbass started in 2014, and when with the Western support, Ukrainian troops were trying to crush these two separatist republics, as they call them, you know, basically former Ukrainian regions, mostly inhabited by Russians, there were lots of Spanish, Italians, Germans, volunteers coming to defend these republics. And these people were called mercenaries in their own countries, in their native countries. In Spain, they opened several criminal cases against the Spaniards who came to help Donbass, even though those Spaniards called themselves like the successors, you know, they were continuing the cause of Spanish Republic fighting Franco. Basically, the government in Kiev is ultra-right. It looks very much like Franco to me. And these people were very consequential when they came to Donbass to defend its people. And there were criminal cases against them in Spain. From Germany, several people, whom the German government could arrest, using their Facebook photos and other data. These people were deprived of German citizenship, and then some of them also ended up in jail or having other problems. So it's interesting that the Western governments crack down on people who help Donbass, but they are encouraging, the Salafist fighters, as you rightly mentioned, to come to Ukraine and help Mr. Zelensky there. This is a very, very cruel attitude. Zelensky himself, look at his behavior. First, in the first days of the fighting, he said he was ready to discuss neutral status for Ukraine with Russia. Russia responded immediately in a very positive way. Putin ordered to send a delegation quickly for negotiations with the Ukrainian delegation. And then the Ukrainian delegation, dragged its feet. They continue to show up with huge delays. They leave and they go. The negotiations are taking place on the border between Belarus and Poland. And the Russian delegation is always there. The problem is with the Ukrainian delegation, which comes and goes. And this prolongs the fighting, even though everyone understands that every new day of the fighting is new sacrifices, new people getting killed or losing their homes. So Mr. Zelensky has no pity for his people. This is the problem with him.
Well, and let me ask you, since you're in Moscow, I want to talk about one thing that's part of the propaganda. And I have never seen anything like the level of propaganda and outright lying, and I'll talk about that in a second. But, Dimitri, let me ask you a question. Over in Moscow, the news in America, some people are saying that people in Russia don't know what's going on, that Putin's fooling everybody, and even the soldiers who've gone into Ukraine, there's this lie over here that the soldiers didn't know they were fighting Ukraine and they wanted to desert. They were tricked into it. I've been talking to people over in Russia for months about this. Nobody in Russia is being fooled. They know exactly what's going on, don't they?
Well, of course, there are lots of ways to find out the truth. Television news in Russia, yes, like in every country at war, you have military officials giving information which may be one-sided. But if you go to the internet and if you read the newspapers, you get all sorts of criticism of the army and of President Putin, and the Ukrainian propaganda is very active. I mean, they are sending videos, and my mailbox is full of messages, obviously supported by the United States and by the EU, because I don't believe that Ukrainians could have access to so many email addresses without some help from the West. But, of course, there's a lot of negative information about the actions of the Russian troops in Ukraine. That is all available for everyone who has a computer or who buys newspapers. As for the action itself, well, few people expected it. Let me remind you that Joe Biden said it would happen. The Western leaders said it would happen. But since they had been lying, Joe Biden and others, about Russia's aggressive intentions for so many years, few people in Russia expected that they were telling the truth this time. And then, President Putin, as always, he acted unexpectedly. He suddenly ordered this military operation to start. And that was unexpected, but of course everyone understood in the army what they were up to. Everyone in the country immediately understood that this was a war against basically the Ukrainian government. This was not hidden. And we understand that it's going to be long, and we understand it's going to be painful. We know that we may lose a lot of friends in the West, people who are opposed to any kind of war. I actually respect, there are some of friends of mine, mostly leftist Western intellectuals, who kind of distanced themselves from Russia after this war started. And they're very nice people, probably the best people I know on the earth. But the question is, could these leftist intellectuals in the West, could they prevent the deployment of American missiles, of American nuclear weapons in Ukraine, right next to Moscow? The answer is no, unfortunately. The influence of nice leftist intellectuals on the American policy is very small. Let's face it, correct me if I'm wrong. The same story in Europe. Okay, yes, maybe we created problems for Eric Zemmour, who said that Russia would never attack Ukraine. Maybe we created problems for some of our friends in Germany. But these people had a zero chance of coming to power simply because the West is no longer a democracy, This is the title of a book published in German, which I just finished reading recently. It says, Demokratie, wir haben nicht lange, seit lange, wir haben es nicht mehr. That means democracy, we have long ago ceased to have it. This is the truth about the West. And Putin, after trying 8 years to reach a compromise with the West, to reach a compromise with Ukraine, finally understood that the only force that could prevent American missiles from being deployed in Ukraine was the Russian army. And yes, this is painful. Yes, it disappointed a lot of our friends abroad. Maybe these friends will come back. Maybe they will understand us later. But we had no other choice because these friends could not save us from the existential threat. And the existential threat was American missiles and Western nuclear weapons or other destructive weapons in Ukraine. This is something we simply cannot allow to happen.
Well, and Dimitri, one of the things I did this morning was I went back and I started looking at the reporting from about 3 weeks ago, about a month ago, not that long ago, but before the invasion started. And at that point, the stories were about Russia's demands that they were making. And when you look at it, right in the demands, Russia's saying we're prepared to take military action if these are ignored. It said it right in there a month ago, what they were going to do. I agree. Some people thought they're so used to politicians lying that they thought maybe Russia doesn't really mean that. But Russia said very clearly, we're prepared to take military action. And that's exactly what they did. But let me say this, too. Yeah, go ahead, Dimitri.
Technical response. They call, the Russians called it military technical response.
Yes.
Here is what we require from you: stop expanding NATO, remove some of the most dangerous troops from Eastern Europe, return them to the situation before 1997, when relations between Russia and the West were normal. Stop military exercises right next to St. Petersburg and in the Black Sea, right next to our other big cities. And if you don't do that, there will be, I quote, a military technical response. And the West was kind of puzzled. What kind of response could that be? And most of the guesses from the Western side were like, oh, they're not going to do anything. You know, what can they do? Are they going to deploy more missiles in Kaliningrad, you know, next to Lithuania? We're not afraid of that. Are they going to do something else? Almost none of them imagined that Russia could respond in a really decisive way with Ukraine. Biden mentioned that possibility, but, in reality, I don't think even Western people believed it. The positive change from this terrible situation, any war is a terrible situation, but the positive change is that now countries like the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, countries like Georgia and Moldova, before they were very rude to Russia. They made insulting statements. They behaved provocatively. Why? They said that they were afraid of the Russian invasion, but in reality, we all understood that they thought it was impossible. Because if you are really afraid of an invasion, you don't provoke. You don't provoke the country that you are afraid of. And these people are not afraid of. They thought that, this would never happen. And after this military action in Ukraine, suddenly they changed their rhetoric. I mean, Georgia did not join sanctions against Russia. Georgia and Moldova are the only countries in Europe which did not join punitive sanctions against Russia. Why? Because they're really afraid. So, I take it, I view it in a larger context. It's like, Cuba. Were there people killed when the American invasion in the Bay of Pigs happened? Yes. Was Castro sometimes cruel to, the Contras, the people who wanted to oust him from power? Yes. But what else could he do? What was the alternative? Just to let the United States win, let the violence win? This is the trick, that we have to do in Russia. NATO is not ready to send its soldiers to Ukraine. NATO is flooding Ukraine with weapons. They are ready to mercenaries, but they are not ready to really stand up for Ukraine. So this is really a very, very, I would say, undignified behavior. This is the attitude of the West is indeed cowardly. They provoked Ukraine into challenging Russia. As Professor John Mearsheimer said, they urged Ukraine to play hardball with Russia. But at the same time, they didn't commit troops and they didn't commit their lives, the Western lives, for protecting Ukraine. And you know why?
Well, and
both Ukrainians and Russians that the West simply does not respect us. We are not human beings for them, neither Russians nor Ukrainians. We can kill each other as much as we want, but not a single precious Western life will be sacrificed for us.
Well, and not only that, not only are they not backing Ukraine after pushing them into this, they're not going to admit Ukraine. And even Zelensky came out and said he's given up on getting into NATO because they made it clear they're not going to do it. Zelensky said that. So let me ask this. Think about what would have happened if the U.S. had said a month ago to Russia, you know what? Let's take NATO, let's take Ukraine joining NATO off the table. We didn't do that. we kept pushing this, and it was never going to happen. And we were saying on this radio station, it's not going to happen. And we see countries like Germany now even saying, we don't even want Ukraine in the EU. That's how little respect. You're right. They have little respect for the Ukrainians. So given that they're not joining NATO and Zelensky's given up on it, I would argue that all of this happened for no reason whatsoever, that the United States could have said, you know what? Well, it would be like if someone said, I'm going to punch you unless you promise not to jump 20 feet in the air. Well, you can't jump 20 feet in the air. It's not possible. So you should agree to that. Okay, I'm not going to do that. And what was happening here was Russia. Yeah, go ahead, Dimitri. Do you think it was ever going to happen?
Let me give you the exact quote of Zelensky, or what he said. He said, I'm getting more and more skeptical about NATO in the context of what's going on in Ukraine. Well, the problem was that Ukraine in the last 2 years became a de facto NATO member without NATO's obligations to defend it. So Ukraine had all the bad sides of NATO. It had to, in fact, it deployed American troops. They were disguised as instructors. They were supposedly teaching Ukrainians to fight, but there were hundreds of American and hundreds of British soldiers and officers operating on the Ukrainian territory. There was already a military base, a military American base on the territory of Ukraine. There was a British naval base next to Achakov. You can check this information. It was also in the Western media. And in short, Ukraine was becoming very dangerous for Russia because it's located so close to the Russian heartland. And on the other hand, NATO did not give Ukraine any security guarantees. There was no Article 5 of NATO rules for Ukraine. Article 5 says that if a NATO country is attacked, all the other countries have to support it by all means possible, including sending troops. So Ukraine had all the bad sides of NATO membership without having any of the good sides. And this was the fault of the pro-American government in Ukraine, which acted exactly like some Latin American puppet of the United States. A lot of Ukrainians made that comparison. They compared the governments of Poroshenko and Zelensky to the American puppets in Latin America. So you are exactly right. The problem was that in 2008, George Bush Jr., he made the first risky move because at the NATO summit in Bucharest, NATO ruled that Ukraine and Georgia would become members of NATO in future. The NATO at the time didn't say exactly when, but NATO said that its doors were open for Ukraine and Georgia. And of course, it didn't pass unnoticed in Russia because this is an existential threat for Russia. If Ukraine is a NATO member, then the United States and Britain and France have the full right to deploy missiles and possibly nuclear weapons there because there are no treaties that would prevent Western countries from doing that. And the Ukrainian border is located just, as I told you, 300 kilometers from Moscow. So it's not even 5 minutes. It's 4 minutes for a modern missile, to reach Russia from that place. So basically, if Washington and NATO had their way with Ukraine, it would mean that they would bring a pistol right to Russia's head. And they could negotiate at some moment with Russia from the position of strength. So Putin, by his military operation, which is, let's face it, it was not a popular move. It's not going to be applauded, by Russians for years because it's going to be a tough war. But the bigger danger, the deployment of Western weapons next to Russia will be removed. So I think some of the my logic, that I think was guiding Putin is that, maybe in Ukraine after this military operation, we will have some hostile population. Maybe some people there could commit some terrorist acts on the territory of Ukraine against Russians, or maybe even on the territory of Russia. But how much damage can terrorist actions inflict on a country? Okay, they may kill 1,000 people at worst, like the terrible terrorist attack on the United States in 2001. It killed about 1,500 people. Very painful, but still it was not life-threatening for the United States. And if you have a hostile state, and Ukraine right now is a hostile state of 40 million people right next to Russia's border. If you have a hostile state, that is an existential danger. This is something that can destroy your country, or that can enable someone like Joe Biden negotiate you from the position of strength. So this was the reason why Putin chose the lesser of two evils, to remove the big danger, facing a smaller danger. That is a hostile part of the Ukrainian population as a result of this operation.
And we're joined by Dimitri Babich, a journalist, straight out of Moscow right now. Now, Dimitri, let me ask you something. You've been a journalist for some time. I want to talk about something I didn't even mention it yesterday. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen, and it's made no headlines at all in the U.S., is that over the weekend, word got out that one of the Ukrainian negotiators, the people trying to negotiate the peace over there, was shot by Ukrainians, by the Ukrainian Secret Service, essentially, the SBU over there, twice in the head. I've seen the photos. Have you ever seen anything as crazy as a negotiator being shot by his own people during basically at the same time negotiations are going on? This is an insane story, and it's made no headlines here in the U.S. Did you see that, Dimitri? You must have.
Because it doesn't fit the image of a democratic government, which the U.S. media has created for Zelensky and his clique. In reality, it's not a democratic government. Since President Yanukovych was ousted in 2014, Ukraine ceased to be a democracy because suddenly the whole party system was upside down in a matter of days, not even weeks. The Communist Party, which used to be the biggest party in Ukraine, was prohibited. The Party of Regions, to which the President Yanukovych belonged, disintegrated in a matter of several months. There was so much pressure on it. Suddenly, the extremist nationalists who were on the fringes of Ukrainian policy up until then, up until 2014, suddenly they became the mainstream. And what you mentioned rightly, this man's name is Denis, and he was basically shot dead by the Ukrainian security service. And the funny thing is that, the security service SBU, which is counterintelligence, declared him a Russian agent. And the Ukrainian intelligence declared him a hero, kind of disagreed with the other special service and saying that, no, he was not a bad man, he was a good man. And he died defending his motherland, incidentally killed by his own security service. The problem is we are used to this sort of things happening in Ukraine. It's very sad, but political assassinations happen in Ukraine almost every week. The head of the separatist republic, Donetsk People's Republic, he was assassinated in 2019, right in a cafe where he came to have lunch. The Ukrainian agents, they placed a bomb there, and they simply killed him and two people who were next to him. The commanders of, pro-Russian militias in Donetsk and Luhansk, they were also assassinated. Motorola and Givi, one of the legendary commanders of, Donetsk forces, they were both assassinated by Ukrainian agents. So political assassinations are commonplace, unfortunately. And this is exactly what happened. The name of the negotiator, again, was Denis Kireev. Please look up that name in the news if you don't believe me. He was assassinated by one Ukrainian security service, and he was proclaimed a hero by another one. And he was one of the initiators of this negotiation. He was one of the people on whom we placed our hopes that somehow these people would bring the fight into the end. And he got killed in the middle of Kiev, right next to the Supreme Court of Ukraine. And the Western media just ignored it because it doesn't fit their message.
Yeah. No, right. And I have a feeling if Vladimir Putin had one of his negotiators, a Russian negotiator, assassinated with no trial and no charges, just boom, shot twice in the head, it might have made the news, but it made nothing here, not even a blip. Dimitri, thanks so much for joining us. Dimitri Babich coming to us from Moscow. Great first appearance by Dimitri. We're bringing you the truth right here on the show that is a free speech zone. Thanks, Dimitri. We'll be back right after this, 202-521-1320. If you want to exercise your free speech, become a caller on The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, there's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
And we are back. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. You're listening to the best damn radio show in the world, and absolutely vital listening in these times right now when there's a war going on, and it's clearly going to have a ripple effect on the worldwide economy. We're seeing that now, that all of these sanctions have done nothing whatsoever to slow down Russia one bit. If the goal was to stop the fighting, it hasn't done it. And now what it's done is Russia saying, and we talked about this earlier in the show, that they're going to stop exporting raw materials. That includes, I think it's going to be gas, oil, the glass for your iPhone, very possibly. By the way, there was an Apple event today, and they announced a new $4,000 Mac Studio, new Mac, that I will admit, I'm enough of a Mac fanboy where I'm salivating on it. It's apparently their new high-end power Mac. It's using the M1 Ultra chip, which is going to be very fast. It's the new Apple Silicon. But anyway, they announced a new iPad Air. They also announced a new iPhone SE at the Apple event today. But they may not, because of the virtue signaling that may not be. I'm not trying to piss anyone off from Russia and make them jealous. You may not get that. You may have to be using the Huawei phones, which seem like pretty nice phones as well. And I don't think Samsung's pulling out. I'll tell you, Rod, did you hear who's going back into Russia after virtue signaling for a couple of weeks? Is Toyota. Did you see that?
I didn't see that.
Toyota, a couple of weeks ago, you know, this is very much a virtue signaling thing. Like everyone's changing their icon to Ukraine flags. It's one of those like, oh, look how, it was like when you could walk down the street and every store had like Black Lives Matter or that, you know what I'm saying, solidarity flags. And you would go onto Amazon just to, whatever, buy a book or something, and they got the Black Lives Matter slogan right in your face. Well, Ukraine's the new Black Lives Matter in the sense that it's the new trendy thing to put in your avatar or whatever. But Toyota had announced a couple of weeks ago, oh, hey, we're trendy too. They didn't say that, but they were implying it. We're not going to go into Russia. Now Toyota's announced, oh, never mind, we like selling cars. So guess what? Toyota's back. Because Russia, again, all of your virtue signaling, pulling Pornhub and McDonald's has not slowed down the fighting one bit. None of the sanctions have slowed things down one bit. Nothing. It's all for naught. And when we see the impact that's going to be, I'll put it like this. Let's place a bet here, Rod. Don't bet with, I still owe Carmine Sabia a steak from a while ago, so I'm not going to put anything here. But I'm really serious. So how high do you think gas prices are going to go in the U.S.? What's your guess, Rod? What do you think we're going to top out at? What would your guess be?
I've been thinking about this the past couple of days. I mean, it's almost gone up about 60 cents. I saw it from like last week to this week from where the gas station closest to me. So if that's in 1 week, and let's say, I say, you know, I could be 100% wrong, but I believe the major conflict would be over by April 1st, but I could be wrong. But if this goes longer into April, I could see it going as high as 650, maybe. I mean, something like that. Something we've never seen. 650, something like that.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm going to say this. It wouldn't surprise me if we have an average gas price of over $7 a gallon. And here's why I say that. Because at this point where we're at right now is I don't care when the fighting ends. Did you see that? We talked about it a little bit yesterday. Did you see this guy, Colonel Doug McGregor on Fox? You must have seen that, right?
Oh, yeah. He was on Tucker yesterday after being with on Fox Business before that, I believe.
Right. So he did an appearance. And my favorite part was when the host literally, I'm almost quoting verbatim. He said, but you're not acting like Zelensky's a hero. And McGregor was like, no, I don't think he's a hero. And you could practically hear the host going, what? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He almost choked on his shilling. Not Ian Schilling. That would be totally different. But he, on his... So I've said this earlier. If you, one way to look at this conflict is the globalists have cast their vote. Klaus Schwab, there's video of him welcoming Zelensky a couple of years ago to the World Economic Forum. And we had that one MP from Ukraine talking about fighting for the New World Order. Okay? Then you've got Soros taking to Twitter. And some people, because they're not paying enough attention to me and the shows that I've been doing and the journalism that I've been doing for years, are just figuring out what have you seen this, Rod? Have you seen some people act shocked that Soros is supporting Ukraine? Have you seen that?
A little bit. I think I've also seen people like, as soon as they are aware of it, they kind of start thinking to themselves like, oh, maybe this isn't what I think it is. But I gotta add to what you're talking about, and I gotta add to it on the entertainment and sports side of it, it would be the Klitschko brothers, the mayor of Kiev, which is Vitaly. It's hard for sports fans, and boxing is a working class sport. It's, people bet on, so a lot of rich people bet on it. It's hard for people who are fans of the Klitschkos, who they're born in Ukraine, but they went to school in Germany and they fought out of Germany. It's hard for people to think that these guys are protecting Nazis and, like you say, the globalist and establishment.
No, I don't know who's worse, the Nazis or the globalists. I'll be honest. And thankfully with Soros, you get two mints in one. But so one of the things is people are shocked by this. I've been talking about it for years. It's not hard to figure out. Soros's International Renaissance Foundation has been in Ukraine since the late 89 to 90, right around there is when it started. And International Renaissance is the single biggest funder of NGOs over there because it funds all these other ones. He was directly responsible for, in 2014, the coup that the United States backed. Soros, I know some people are just picking up on this now, but I've been talking about it for years, and it's not conjecture. It's not a guess. Soros is a major player in Ukraine. And the fact that the World Economic Forum, when I say the globalists, Schwab and Soros, you don't get more globalisty than that, I would say, are behind Zelensky, pulling for him all the way, talking about what a hero he is. Some people are just waking up now going, wait a minute, I don't like those dudes. What's going on? If you can't figure out let me put it a different way. I said this a few weeks ago. Why would anyone assume that the media, who literally lies and is wrong about every single subject, from Donald Trump and his presidency to immigration, and an example of that, and I'm not saying that as a Trump suck-up. I pointed out, Rod, you know this. How many times have I talked about, and you can feel free to give the answer, I don't know exactly, but too many. How many times have you heard me talk about Genie Energy in my reporting, Rod?
Oh, I'd have to say at least over like 200. Yeah, about 200, something like that.
Yeah, no, I talked about Genie Energy for years. And I've criticized the Trump administration for allowing people like Ira Greenstein into the administration. If the media wanted to take down Trump, here's a genuine scandal. In the Trump administration, there was this guy, Ira Greenstein, who was head of a company called Genie Energy, brought in there through Jared Kushner, who the media also claims not to be fans of. And he was brought in to pick people of the State Department. He was the head of a company called Genie Energy, which owned the oil under the Golan Heights. And the only way to get that oil was to give control of the Golan Heights to Israel, because Syria had control of the Golan Heights. So eventually Trump just went out and did that with Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, standing right next to him. Anyone can look that up. So I'm not a Trump sycophant. That was a horrible scandal in the Trump administration. Yet not one mainstream media outlet touched that one. They don't want to touch that one. And part of the reason they don't want to touch it is the Genie Energy board is people like Democrats like Bill Richardson, Mary Landrieu, Republicans like Dick Cheney, people like Rupert Murdoch, people like Jacob Rothschild. Go look that up. Genie Energy, Genie like Genie in a bottle. We got more coming up. Our friend Jason Goodman from Crowdsource of Truth joining us right after this on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. This is a show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. And we're joined by our guest host on Tuesdays. It's a Truth Tuesday with our friend Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth. Hey, Jason, how you doing?
I'm great, Lee. How are you?
I'm pretty groovy, although, you know, it's stressful times. We'll talk about the information war that's going on in just one sec. But let me have you do the honors first. Say the name of the show. Go ahead.
The Backstory.
So later on, you and I will be talking to author and writer Tom Nichols about some stuff that's not war-related, Jason. But I want to talk about, so you and I have known each other a long time, and we've worked in the field of visual effects and filmmaking for a while. And I'm a free speech person, but I'll say something. If I found out, Jason, and you know I love you, so it's nothing personal, but if you had used a program like Adobe After Effects, let's say, and gone in and literally faked footage, I'd have to call you a lying bastard. And vice versa, right? If you found out that I had taken footage and literally done visual effects on it to make something seem different than it was, that's just lying, right?
Well, if it's news and not some kind of narrative feature film, yes. For movies, that's okay. Visual effects are great. You've worked on many feature films, but for the news, you cannot. I don't even like editing footage for the news.
And so what I've seen people do, I've seen a couple of examples of this on this great ASB military Twitter feed, where they show before and after, where they show clips where somebody has taken like a tank that's on fire, and they put a Russian logo on it to make it look like it's a Russian tank on fire.
Yeah.
Now, to me, I'm in favor of free speech, but whoever does that kind of thing should be prosecuted as far as I'm concerned. That should be illegal.
Well, it's deception. Free speech does not include lying. There's limitations to free speech, obviously. And, you know, Lee, you were talking about this before. It's unbelievable that the media isn't mentioning Genie Energy and Trump. When you detailed the particulars of that to me, I became pissed off. And I'm actually, as a result of that, I'm not sure that I could or would vote for Trump if he did run again, because that is so egregious and criminal. It really, I mean, it's not quite as bad as what the Clintons have done and the Bidens have done, but it's absolutely high crimes. And why are they impeaching him for trying to stamp out corruption in Ukraine and saying nothing about that?
Well, and yeah, and I would agree with that, because let me just sum up the Gene Energy story. What I'm suggesting is that the Trump administration literally waged war against Syria in an area, the Golan Heights, for the purpose of giving the Golan Heights to Israel in order that former Trump administration officials and others could make money.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I'm saying
I think
happened.
So. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of evidence that supports that claim.
It's very clear. And Trump eventually giving the Golan Heights to Israel with Alan Dershowitz, a major Israeli supporter. Netanyahu's involved. Jared Kushner's involved. And let me explain how they're involved. Genie Energy is the child company. The parent company is MCI Telecommunications, based out of Newark, New Jersey, much like Carmine Stavia. MCI, okay, is owned by a guy named Howard Jonas.
Not IDT?
Yes. What's that?
It wasn't IDT? Or is it the same thing?
You could be right. I could have the
initials wrong. It was IDT. MCI was a different scandal. This is IDT Telecommunications.
Okay, so if that's what it is, I've got my initials wrong.
Acronyms, right? It's confusing.
I could be right though. Let me say this, because the building in Newark that they rent, and it's named after them. So whoever it is, no. Do me a favor. Do me a favor. Look up MCI Jonas, like the Jonas Brothers, Jonas, the Mba people. I'm not saying they have anything to do with it. It's just a pop culture reference, and I can't help it.
Jonas, Bayer, Hoffman, MCI, Insurance Bank.
Howard Jonas.
Yeah, he's IDT. It's IDT. I just looked him up.
IDT,
Howard S. Jonas is a businessman, telecom, and the founder of IDT Corporation and Genie Energy.
Okay, IDT. So that company.
You've said it a million times. IDT. Yeah.
Yeah, IDT. Forgive me. Do you know why I'm confusing them? Because one of the businesses IDT's in is the phone card business.
Right. Also,
in other words, which is right, exactly right. And remember, MCI was in that business too.
That's what their scandal was. Right.
Right. So that's why I'm confusing them. But anyway, that building that they rent in Newark, who owns that building, Jason?
I'm pretty sure it's either Jared Kushner or his father.
It's his father, Charles Kushner. Yeah. And the reason that's significant is Jonas is a close family friend of the Kushners. So the connections to the Trump administration are as clear as they can be, but the media's never gone after that. Let's
it's unbelievable.
We got a couple. Right, it is. It is. Yeah. And if they were serious about getting Trump, this is the one. If that was called up, they were using the office of the presidency, particularly the ability to wage wars for financial gain.
Yeah.
That's an impeachable offense right there. But they don't go after him for that.
No, and I want to clarify for anybody who's sitting in the audience feeling smart, like, oh, Lee just made a mistake, so maybe he's making other mistakes. Everything that I know about this, Lee, you've told me. And when you're sitting on the radio all day, speaking extemporaneously, if you don't have these notes in front of you, keeping these details like a 3-letter acronym straight, it's very easy to make a mistake. I want to assure everyone that none of the conclusions that you arrive at are happening in the heat of the moment on a radio broadcast. All of this stuff has been extensively researched for years, and a temporary slip of the memory like that is not a significant error.
Well, and I'm also pointing out that I'm not completely insane. I didn't say it was the BBC or RKO or whatever.
Right, they're very related, right.
I picked a company that's in the same business, and I got the wrong acronyms, and oops.
Yeah.
I've never claimed to be not human. I'm simply the best damn journalist in the world. So
I got a question.
But yeah, go ahead.
Because these guys are there with Genie Energy. We know that Burisma is doing stuff with natural gas and energy, and Kolomoisky is there. He's got the television station with Zelensky. Is there any connection between Genie Energy, this board of directors, Kolomoisky, and Burisma?
Nothing springs to mind, but it wouldn't shock me. And I'll put it like this. One of the connections, pretty obviously, is that Rupert Murdoch, who's on the board of Genie Energy, pushes these wars. You can see that on Sean Hannity's show last night.
Every show on Fox. Every show. They're calling for immediate war. Except Tucker Carlson, right. Brian Kilmeade is ready to nuke them.
Yes. And I'd be in favor of sending Brian Kilmeade into war. Go volunteer, Brian. Go hang out with that ISIS platoon who's over there now. The al-Nusra platoon, Al-Qaeda platoon. But 202-521-1320. Let's get to our friend named after Bohemian Grove, by the way, Jason. Owl Killer. He's opposed to Bohemian Grove. Hey, Owl Killer, what's on your mind?
Hey, you know something? Now, what I wanted to finish my first off, I'm going to go after you brought up aliens. Now that and I wanted to cover real quick. If the government is talking about them, they don't exist. Second, that's facetious, but anyway, you I wanted to get into yesterday the whole Nazi connection in Ukraine. Now, probably last year, I had said, yeah, okay, we may be supporting people that say they're Nazis, but it's not. You know, it's probably just to like get at Russia, in a sense. It's very, very real, and I can't.
Yes.
How many world leaders are descendants of Nazis? You have Christina Freeland up in Canada.
Canada, yes.
Prime Minister whose grandfather, I think it's Michael Chomiak, was a Ukrainian.
That's right.
Klaus Schwab is related to Gunther Schwab, who is an Austrian writer and Nazi Party member. I believe Juncker in Belgium, who's the head of the who is the head of the European Union, unelected, a totally unelected clown, is related to the guy who made the Juncker bombers. So Sean Stone was on Alex Jones on Sunday, and he did the second hour. And he breaks down everything from Operation Gladio, everything going forward, how basically the CIA went into Eastern Europe, and they were literally partnering with people that were admitted Nazis. So it's not so much a Nazi conspiracy, but I think it's more that ideology aligns with their worldview of the way that they think that society should be run, and I think that's a real issue. And
well, and by the way, Rod, real quick, let's see if we can get Sean Stone on again to talk about some of that stuff. Let me tell you, you got a good point here, Al-Qaeda. Let me say one other area where it connects. German psychology and education are an important underpin to a lot of what's going on. The German form of education is largely responsible for the public school system that we have today. And the German psychology, what it has to do is a certain mechanistic view of psychology, stimulus and response, that kind of thing. And when you apply both of those things, and you see what the CIA was doing, a lot of what they were doing with programs like MKUltra and things like, I'll put it like this, it's not an accident when you look at Paperclip, which is a CIA operation that brought in German rocket scientists. But I think that the underpinnings of German education and psychology underlie a lot of the globalist stuff that we're seeing. I don't know, does that make any sense, Jason?
Yeah, it does, Lee. I mean, I have long thought that what we're seeing here is the reemergence of this, rumored Fourth Reich. It's been well documented that when the top military leaders of Germany realized they were going to lose the war, there was an effort made to hide German technology and wealth and spread it throughout the world. There was a whole documentary made about Mengele in Brazil that had a lot of evidence of him being there. And, as we're saying, all around the world leaders, captains of industry, these people who are descendant of Nazis, it's not just Werner von Braun and a couple of people. There were over 1,000 Nazi scientists, academics, doctors, intelligence operatives, political people brought into the United States, and it was a race against the Soviet Union to get this Nazi brain trust, in part because the Nazis were developing the atomic bomb and learning how to harness the power of, nuclear fission and nuclear energy.
And developing propaganda techniques.
Right.
I'll put it like this. The original cultural use of propaganda really, in a big way, goes back to Leni Riefenstahl. And Hitler used media, right? Hitler would have put a comedian on Netflix if he could have. But
well, the first television broadcast ever was done by the Nazis.
No, and when I bring up Leni Riefenstahl, she's the if I say great German filmmaker, I mean literally. She was a pioneering, the great part's not the Nazi part, but she was a pioneering filmmaker. So you talk about using the media to sell ideas in this case, aberrant, horrible ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
They really were pioneers of that. And this was all over. And the Gestapo, and the thing that's important about Bandera, I was thinking about this. Because some people go, well, there's Nazis in Russia, or there's Nazis in the U.S. So you're saying,
everywhere,
no, there's no Nazis like Bandera.
Right.
There's no Nazis in Russia who there's parades about him on his birthday decades after he's dead. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no, is there any Nazi leader in the United States where every year people throw a parade for him?
Or that some presidential candidate says, you know what, we're going to get rid of Martin Luther King Day and make it, Goebbels Day. No one's saying
right. And Goebbels, and I got to say, and the other thing is and people like to say stuff like somebody on Twitter today was like, well, what about the 25 million Ukrainians that Stalin killed? That's about the Holodomor. And there's a whole book about that, and I post the whole book on Twitter. This is another propaganda thing put into place by the Germans. And that's very clear. The book details that. And
well, this tweet you're describing, Lee, is also a prime case of whataboutism. Because, all right, we're not saying anything about Stalin. We're not denying that. But we don't have a militarized gang of Stalin supporters. Okay, you're denying it. I don't know anything about it. I'm just saying there is not, in 2022, a militarized gang of Stalin supporters going around killing Ukrainians. For the past 8 years, Putin has been very clear in his purpose of the problem that is existing and attempting to be solved in Ukraine. He hasn't been saying, I'm putting back together the Soviet Union and traveling all through Eastern Europe and taking all this land. He's saying, we've got Nazis killing ethnically Russian Ukrainian citizens, and the government is not stopping it.
No, and not only that, it's the philosophy. I'll call them Ukrainian Nazis because they're not like German Nazis who believe in Aryan supremacy. They're Ukrainian Nazis who believe in Slavic supremacy. And they want to get rid of the impure mutts, the way they view. This is why they call the Russians speakers in Eastern Ukraine subhuman. They've used that phrase.
This is importantly. Let me just interject here because, I've seen a video today. I don't know when it was made, but it's Zelensky sort of mocking this claim that there are Nazis in Ukraine. He's saying, how can there be, they call us Nazis. How can we be Nazis? I'm Jewish. And it is obvious propaganda technique because, it's becoming more and more clear to me how big of an issue it is that people in Ukraine are upset that half of the country or a significant portion of the country speaks Russian. And here we have a guy who's the president of Ukraine whose primary language, and every time I hear him speaking, it's in Russian.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I got to say that it is, and this is one of the reasons we've had Yakov Shapiro on my show a number of times here. People need to understand this is a pure Zionist trick.
Yes.
Because I don't believe Zelensky's observant for a second.
I'm with you.
In fact, I've heard his wife is Christian and his child was baptized.
He is 2 years younger than my ex-wife, who was born in Ukraine. And she was completely devoid of religion because people who were born in 1975 and 1977 and grew up in the 80s and came of age in the 90s, their life, their formative years occurred during Soviet communism. Religion was banned, and only the most pious and secretive Jews would go underground. Anyone trying to be observant in their religion had to hide it, and they were fearful that they would be caught. So I think most people became entirely secular, and I would be surprised if anyone right now really identifies with religion outside of a minority of people. I mean, I'm speaking out of turn, but Ukrainians that I've met, and the one Ukrainian that I was married to who grew up in the communist era of the Soviet Union, religion was a void in their lives.
Well, I think as people get older, they might do something, but they were most likely to become either Orthodox or, in the case of some people in Ukraine, Catholic, because those are the two major Christian sects over there, you know. Right. But I want to play a clip. Let me ask Command Central, do we have the long clip about the humanitarian corridors? Okay, so let's play this, Jason. This is an interview. It's pretty long, but there's Russia's tried to get these humanitarian corridors open to let people, civilians, get out of cities that they're about to decimate, because they are going to. As we said earlier, as Brave put it on another show, Russia ain't playing. And so they're creating these humanitarian corridors, and Ukraine's not allowing people in. And I thought this interview with a Russian diplomat over there, it seems like somebody negotiating, I thought this is a good summary of the Russian position. So that's why I'm playing it, because you don't hear the Russian position much. This is it. Let's hit that, Command Central, please.
We promised to open these humanitarian corridors, and we did it. And I would say that only yesterday we kept almost 400 big buses absolutely empty, ready to take people out of the surrounded cities and take them whenever they want. But all these 400 empty, huge buses remained empty for the whole day. Nobody came. So the only explanation for that is that the Ukrainian government does not control these armed forces in the surrounded cities and in the far areas of the Ukraine. I can't find any more normal answer for that. We promised the ceasefire, and we kept it today, yesterday, the day before yesterday, for approximately 5, 6, 7 hours every day. And despite of that, nobody came out of the cities. So they don't let the people go out. They keep it as a human shield. And that's the problem. And they don't follow the orders of the Kiev government. So it's really a tragedy. But we continue to keep these humanitarian corridors, and we decided to go on again, to keep it open every day for a few hours with a full ceasefire from Russian side. By the way, the ceasefire is not kept by the Ukrainian side. They still continue to fire from time to time and make people afraid to go out. It's not my job to comment on some sayings of Ukrainian Vice Premier and other politicians, but I would say that when we're talking about, well, human lives, when we're talking about the life of a child, the life of a woman, of a girl, of a boy, it's not the question of morality or immorality or politicians. It's a question of a life. Who cares where they go? Do they go west, east, north, and south? The purpose is to let civilians, women, seniors, kids, to let them go out of these cities that are still kept by Ukrainian forces, to save them. And we are doing our best to do that.
Now, Jason, the reason they're talking about west, north, south, and so on, the reason he brings that up even is because what the Ukrainians are saying is that these humanitarian corridors are invalid because they're letting people go to eastern Ukraine, Russia, or Belarus. Now, it seems to me like if Russia's letting people go to Belarus or Russia, it's because they're going to be safer there. right? That shouldn't be
Makes
something
sense.
they should object to. And if people don't want to go, that's one thing. But to not let them go, I think the scariest thing that he's saying there is that it doesn't seem like he controls these cities, that people like the Azov Battalion, for instance, are just doing this on their own. That seems consistent to me, but that is a scary situation. So anyway.
Yeah, and you were talking about this earlier about, the intense disinformation that we're seeing. I mean, just the other day, there was a very low-resolution black and white surveillance footage of just some, tracer fire or just some streaks. I mean, you couldn't really make out what was going on at all. And this was reported all over the place as Russia is attacking the largest nuclear facility in Europe. And just for people who are wondering, well, gee, is that true or not? Without being there, we can't determine definitively, but just speaking from a logical standpoint, whether people agree with what we're saying or disagree with what we're saying, whether people like Russia or dislike Russia, it's an undeniable fact that it's an organized country of 140 million people. And unlike the nonsense that's been spewed on CNN and Fox and from Joe Biden, for the past 20 years, Putin has not behaved in a manner that is consistent with the description of him being a maniac or a bloodthirsty killer or any of those types of things. As I observe over the past 20 years, he seems to be focused on creating a prosperous and economically stable Russia where people can have kind of normal lives and get involved in international commerce, and he wants a prosperous country for his people and security, which is what a president is intended to do. So it doesn't make sense that they would launch an attack on a facility that, if the attack were successful, would pollute their own country with deadly toxic gas and an environmental catastrophe that would become an immediate emergency. That is the activity of terrorists who want to make it look like Russia is doing that, so that gullible people watching the news will say, oh, Russia's terrible, send money to UNICEF, don't buy Russian products, etc.
And it is one of the most successful and well-funded propaganda campaigns. And I pointed this out. When I say well-funded, it's partially this guy, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who I refer to as Biden's oligarch, because he was clearly sponsored by Joe Biden, Senate Resolution 322. I've talked about that for years. I'm not sure even Russia fully grasped this. Now, do we have that Khodorkovsky clip real quick? Before we get to talk, let's hit that. Let's hear more about Mikhail Khodorkovsky.
I've been fighting him for almost 20 years, and 10 of those years in prison. I don't want to imagine what he's thinking about. I'm absolutely convinced, though, that he is the enemy of humankind. So this is a man who took the decision that he can kill people and bomb towns for some interest of his own. He is my personal enemy, and I think he's the enemy of any normal human being.
What frame of mind do you think he's in?
Of course, we can see that in the clinical features of paranoia. We can see a man who is afraid of his own entourage, but that doesn't mean to say that he's not dangerous anymore.
Has Vladimir Putin bitten off politically a lot more than he can chew at this point?
I think Putin thought he would be met with flowers in Ukraine, and that he would convince people that he was there to liberate them from these so-called Nazis he keeps going on about. Putin is firmly convinced that people themselves can't fight for freedom themselves. It must be some Americans forcing them to do it. And so today he's shocked.
Now, so first off, you're talking about killers. That's Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who is, anybody can look up the murder connected to him. But here's a little journalistic hint, Jason. If any journalist is doing a piece on me, go to my future ex-wife, ask her, what do you think of Lee's psychology? Right? You're going to get an answer from somebody who's very mad at me, who's going to say not nice things about me. So going to a guy who clearly hates Putin and asking him, so what do you think about Putin's psychology? You're not a journalist. Does that make sense?
But why do they even care? Who is Mikhail Khodorkovsky to the people, whoever is watching that news? Like, why is he the guy they're asking? Fox has had Browder on, and we go to Bill Browder now. Who the hell is Bill Browder to a Fox viewer that they should care?
Well, when you look at the connections of Rupert Murdoch to this whole network, his support for Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and the fact that Khodorkovsky was on the board of the Carlyle Group and so on, things become much clearer. But 202-521-1320, real quickly, I want to go to Ingrid, then Brave will get to you. Ingrid, what's on your mind?
So glad you're talking about Khodorkovsky. Anyway, on the human corridors, what I kind of understood is that, for one thing, say in Mariupol, it's very, very close to the Russian border, which is why they are proposing the corridors go towards Russia, as opposed to it's either 150 miles or 150 kilometers in the other direction. And furthermore, if they go in the other direction, they're going to be between the opposing forces, and they're going to be going into a situation where, as the Russians move west, they're going to be in another cauldron. So it's kind of pointless, but there's been this argument about, well, we don't want you to take them to Russia.
No, and I look, one of the things that shows to me is when that's your argument, you can't say, and Ukraine is saying two things simultaneously. They're saying that Russia's firing citizens trying to leave. They're accusing them of that. You can't say Russia's firing on citizens, and when they escape, we don't want them to go to Russia. Which one is it? Is Russia not letting people leave? You see what I'm saying, Jason?
Well, they're doing that all the time. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth. I mean, at once they're telling us, oh, Russia hacked everything. The election in 2016. There was something they said they hacked. You know, you and I did a show. It's like, where's the evidence of this hack? So they're trying to create this sense in the American public that Russia is this dangerous cyber adversary. But now I'm seeing online that just like townspeople in Ukraine are hacking their military radios and posting the codes. And we're also being told, oh, Russia's such a threat. We need NATO and all these countries in an alliance. But apparently you can just hand out a bunch of AK-47s to old men and criminals, and they can defeat the Russian army, according to this propaganda. So like you're saying, which is it?
And by the way, the criminals, it should be pointed out that Zelensky literally released thugs from prison to fight Russia. That's a good move, Zelensky. 202-521-1320. We got Tom Nichols coming up right after a break. But first, we want to get to Brave, who we were talking about before. His ears must have been burning. Hey, Brave, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Really quickly, I was wondering if you watched the testifying of Victoria Nuland, and of course the Department, CIA, and the intelligence agencies testifying on Russia and the Russian invasion.
No, wait. Hey, Brave, let me stop you for 1 second. To me, this sounds like a very bad – I'm having trouble understanding what Brave's saying.
Victoria Nuland testifying before the CIA, did you say, Brave?
Yeah. I'm sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I put you on speakerphone. I wasn't actually on Bluetooth. But, yeah, so Victoria Nuland was at Capitol Hill, and they were I guess they were here having intelligence hearings today where they basically were I don't want to say the wrong word on the radio. They were basically, let's say, giving the full handy love to the for predicting Russia's invasion and everything of that nature. And then they had Victoria Nuland come out and testify as well. And I guess she was just there to rewrite history or something. I'm not sure. But
yeah.
Well, Victoria Nuland, there could not have been any Nazis involved in 2014 because Victoria Nuland's Jewish. So it's not possible. I'm just saying. I think... Hey, Brave, we got to go to a break here. Someone asked, Brave, what is your website? People want to see your work, Brave.
Oh, they can go to artbybrave.com.
Artbybrave.com.
Great.
Okay. I want to do a quick break. Brave, always great to hear from you. Sorry, we got to only for time. We got Tom Nichols joining us. We got a lot of stuff to talk to Tom about. It's not war related. Some of it's Rolling Stones related. You'll see where we get there in 1 second, Jason. here on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the report.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Despite the best efforts of the Washington Post, that's where we are, Jason. We're still on the radio. But,
is the Post trying to take Sputnik off?
It is. They ran a story yesterday. I do look fabulous in the picture. I'm kind of dressed fancy. I'm not wearing a dead shirt like I am now. I'm in a suit and tie and everything else. It's from a few years ago. But joining us now, great friend of the show, we're always honored and pleased to talk to Tom Nichols, writer and author. Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Hey, Lee, how are you? I'm fine, thank you.
I'm good. Now, Tom, this is a free speech zone, so we didn't bring you on to talk about the war. We have other stuff to talk to you about. But let me do what I've done with everybody who's a guest. Do you have any thoughts at all that you want to share with people on this Russian-Ukraine war that's going on? Anything you want to say?
I have always thought that this country has been obsessed with Russia for too long, going back to the 2016 election. It's been Russia, Russia, Russia. It's been slowly building. And however, I go to a Russian Orthodox church, by the way, so you should see the conditions in my parish. They are really mixed. A lot of Russian and Ukrainian people, families on both sides, as it were. So I see this as partially a religious war among Orthodox churches, the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine, as well as the Moscow-sanctioned Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's very multi-layered and very complex. I'm afraid that Putin, however, has overdrawn his hand, and and it's a shame, because I don't want to see Russia become what they've always thought Russia was, going way, way back. And so, I hope that he has an epiphany, as it were, and common sense prevails, and it stops, because we cannot go into a world war, because it would be too ugly and devastating, as we all know.
But it's not Putin driving us to a world war. It's Joe Biden. It's Barack Obama. It's Hillary Clinton. It's Henry Kissinger, George Soros, all these people. Putin is defending the sovereignty of Russia and his own government and his own life, frankly. This is about the balkanization of Russia and murdering Putin. He knows that.
Okay. All right.
He's looking at Gaddafi. He's looking at Saddam Hussein. He knows what the United States is up to.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I mean, that's an opinion. I don't know. I started off defending Russia, but I'm trying to look at both sides. I think that when you're in a situation like this, it takes two sides to come together, make compromises, and negotiate. So if you want to be bullheaded and continue on with a blindfold on, I mean, is a crusade worth the safety of the world? And, you know, conservatives are very, very split on this issue. I mean, a lot of conservative sites are go Ukraine, and it's very, very confusing. People are all over the place like shattered glass with this war.
Mm-hmm.
And,
by the way, Tom, that was Jason Goodman saying that, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Hey, Jason, Tom. And I'm always saying that to point out that I'm the one who's supposed to be the Russian shill here, Jason. What are you doing? Trying to take my job?
I'm not shilling for anybody. I'm looking at facts. And just, if I may address what Tom said, you know, it's the thing that I'm seeing that's happening, and it's confusing. I'm not sure why. Lee addressed this at the top of the show. This is absolutely the most stunning propaganda campaign. You know, we're in the first cyber war ever. The number of social engineers that I'm seeing on Twitter and YouTube and all over the place that are confusing people along the lines of what you're saying. I don't see a well-educated American public that's coming to conclusions after thoughtfully examining this. I mean, I got the sense from what you just said.
Let me throw it to Tom. Tom, do you think that's a valid concern? Because I also want to talk about the story that we brought him on to talk about.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with what Jason just said. It's becoming ridiculous now. Hamburger chains are getting into the act. It's like going down to your local McDonald's and clean outlets. It's everybody is jumping on this anti-Russian boat, and so yes, I agree with it.
Now, Tom, there was a story you recently wrote, and last time you were on, we didn't get to it, so let's get to it now. You're talking about the possibility of a music festival. This is after the horrible catastrophe that it seemed to me at the music festival, the Astroworld thing that happened a few months ago in Texas, that was preventable and predictable, unfortunately. But you have a great piece, and you start to go into the history of the Stones concert at Altamont that the film Give Me Shelter covered. Yeah. Can you talk about that and tell people where they can find your story, Tom?
Well, you know, this was about the Live Nation concert, and I compared it to the Mick Jagger Altamont thing, where they had the Hells Angels kind of make sure there was peace and order among the hundreds and thousands of people there. Of course, you can't trust the Hells Angels. Frankly, I tend to avoid crowds. Wherever too many people gather, there's bound to be trouble. It's like written into the human DNA. I mean, whether it's a shopping mall or a subway platform. You know, I was even wary of the crowds at the Wailing Wall when I went, and I saw even trouble there among people because there were too many people gathered into a small space. So,
Tom, let me just add one thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but before you get too far off this topic, at Altamont, not only were the Hells Angels security guards, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, but they paid them in beer, correct?
Oh.
Yes, well,
what could go wrong?
It was, I think, 1969, and I guess that was a big deal. And Hell's Angels like a life of sensation and drink, and so maybe the beer appealed to them. It was hot, and I don't know how Mick Jagger got away so cheap. I don't know why they would have. Yes, but they did. They did pay them in beer. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you say, Jason, what could go wrong? You paid the Hells Angels in beer. But it reminds me kind of Zelensky releasing prisoners and then giving out AK-47s in Ukraine. But go ahead, Tom.
Yeah.
Pick up the story. So what are they planning in Philly, even after the deaths? And do you agree with me that what happened in Texas was predictable and preventable?
What happened in Texas, meaning Live Nation? Yes, I think it was. I mean, I think that it becomes a corporate crowd thing. The more people you can shove in there, the more money you make. It's excitement for a lot of concert goers, of course, because the more people, the more fun it is. Of course, it works the reverse for me. That always spells trouble. Crowds can also be worked up by music. Music has a great hypnotic mantra-like power, and it can attract violent people, and it has a tendency, I think, in many cases, to kind of draw them out, and so that they can act out. And I think that we don't acknowledge the power of this thing. It's almost like that Kundalini yoga energy in reverse, where it's supposed to be peaceful and meditative, but instead it like hits something central within us, and it brings out really, really violent tendencies, not only during the concert, but after the concert. Where there are always instances of like fist fights and gun instances and so forth. So, I mean, these concerts have like never appealed to me. Even something like the Moody Blues and the Academy of Music, there's still too many people in a small space. So, I think it could have been avoided in Texas. I mean, they let the crowd run away with itself, and there were just too many people in a small space.
And what are they looking at doing in Philly? Because Philly, you don't even need music to get some violence going in Philly at this point. Just right, all the
violence is without music. It's like a silent film, but people fall down and go boom, as they used to say about children. But I don't know. I mean, I have a good friend who lives in East Germantown. He has an apartment, and 1 block from his apartment, there was a murder the other day. A 68-year-old guy went to an ATM to get money out for his granddaughter, was robbed and shot dead right on the sidewalk.
Wow.
And so he's beginning to have second thoughts about living there. This was formerly, maybe the neighborhood didn't look so nice, and there was like minor trouble, but it seems to be getting everywhere all over Germantown, and you never know when it's going to pop up.
You know what, Tom? This is what I was thinking when you were talking to us about the concert. I mean, I agree, and I know what you're saying about being around too many people. It absolutely can lead to problems. But what I'm seeing on the streets of New York City that has intensified just dramatically over the past 2 years is this sense, I think young males, which the three of us were at a certain point, the hormones, the energy, the developing body, there's a lot of chemically driven impulses to do things that are maybe physically ahead of the mental development, and the pack mentality among any youths like that can amplify these feelings. And what's happening in New York, and what's happening in Philadelphia, and what's happening in cities around the United States, particularly in the wake of these violent attacks on police, these calls by politicians to defund the police, these completely irresponsible district attorneys and attorneys general that are feeling like they want to be understanding what motivates criminals rather than isolating them from society and keeping us safe. It sent a message to people on the street who otherwise might have just been, wisecrackers, are now petty criminals. And petty criminals are graduating to assault. And those that might have engaged in assault are graduating to armed robbery and murder. And we're seeing these emboldened criminals not only on the streets of New York, but the same mentality in Ukraine, when these criminal militarized gangs can run around and take control of towns and the government doesn't do anything or even endorses them. We've cultivated a culture of violence, and there's no law enforcement and there's no accountability.
I agree. I mean, you mentioned Ukraine, and I have to agree with that. I've never been totally I'm a bit suspicious of especially Western Ukraine, where, high degree of like neo-Nazi activity and whatnot. I mean, I know the BBC made a great documentary about the trouble there about 3 or 4 years ago. Of course, that's all forgotten now, and now that problem is just swept under the rug, like it never existed or that it doesn't exist. I think that in this country, a lot of it started with the George Floyd riots and with COVID lockdowns. And because the police were so on the sidelines, as it were, lackadaisical, they let a lot of riots destroy a large portion of the city. And certainly in my own city, there are still stores that are boarded up to from 2020. And so this, over time, it's like it emboldens people like this. And it has an effect. It has a definite effect.
Yeah.
Now, Tom Nichols, let me just put both you and Jason to, let me allay your worries for a second. Fear not, because in New York, to mellow everybody out, we've had supervised injections, and that's coming to Philly, right, Tom? Explain what supervised injections are and how this is going to chill everybody out. I'm saying that facetiously, of course. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, they are institutional. I mean, guarded mini sites where if you are addicted to drugs, opioids or something, you can go and inject your drug of choice with a Red Cross nurse by your side. And so if you overdose, you get immediate medical attention. Everything is safe and clean, and then you walk out and go home. I mean, it sounds kind of benign on paper, but the thing is that, I mean, my thoughts are that if you have a pressing drug problem, you're not going to hop on the L or onto a SEPTA bus and travel 5 miles to the nearest safe injection site. This urge to inject and to get high can be quite sudden and immediate, so you're going to go behind the dumpster or you're going to go where they sell the drugs. You're not going to travel anywhere in the city. And so this always confounds me, this idea that you can train people who have this problem to go to one site across town and to have it work. Yeah, it'll be an added cushion for them, that's true, but basically they will do it where they feel the need. And I mean, it's like probably true that it does reduce overdose mortality, which is a big campaign slogan for the pro-injection site people. But, I mean, I think that's all it does. It may drive down HIV infection or calls to an ambulance company or something. But basically, I think it coddles people. I mean, it doesn't. I think it's probably dangerous. So yeah, I mean, I don't like it.
Well, no, and I will just say, in fairness, it does sound like a great way to meet chicks. So I don't know if they're doing a ladies' night there, but I'm just saying that it would be nice to meet a girl where I would not be the biggest problem they had. You see what I'm saying, Jason?
No, I like that point of view, Lee. I agree with Tom, but I think it's even worse than what Tom is saying, because I've spoken to some people who have experience with overcoming addiction, and there are a lot of responsible people who feel that anything at all that encourages the drug use in the addict is not beneficial.
Right. Right, and we seem to be slowly sliding into this full acceptance of it, like, well, we can't lick it. Yeah. There's so many of them. Look out.
Might as well pay for it. Right.
Count them. And So we need to make concessions. We need to accommodate this whole new population. It's becoming like a minority group. That's what's really strange about it. And then you have people, allies, who carry protest signs, and they talk about them like they're a minority that are being discriminated against. It's very strange.
Now, you've got the great Soros-backed DA down there in Philly, Larry Krasner. Does he have anything to do with this at all, Tom? Is Larry behind this at all?
Philly, right.
Well,
right. Philly, sorry.
Krasner just appeared at Allegheny and Somerset, which is a big drug hangout along the Market Frankfurt L. I don't know what he was doing there, but he made a public appearance there. And Rod and I were talking earlier about how he told me that Krasner's wife told him that he had to put on a more sympathetic public face, that he had this image of this like army tank that just went into a place without any feeling and just let off criminals and didn't have a heart. You know, it's like something out of the Wizard of Oz that just had this agenda, and he followed it blindly. But Krasner seems totally immune to anything that happens here. 5 children killed on a stoop, a grandmother shot through her Pontiac convertible or whatever. It's just that it doesn't seem to affect him. I mean, you know, you never get a human reaction. You never get maybe we need to come to the table and talk about this. And you just don't get that with him. And I think he's been made a celebrity with the documentary film that's been out and that is like going around the country, that has gone over the airwaves. And I mean, right now he's an icon. And when you're that high up in the icon sphere, you're untouchable. And I think that's the way that he behaves.
But look at what you just said, because of the documentary.
Jason, I could be incorrect about this. I believe that documentary about Krasner was directed by Leni Riefenstahl. Am I right about that, or am I getting something?
That's what I'm getting at. More propaganda.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think you're right. That's a good analogy. Yeah.
Well, we're talking about how the Germans really perfected that kind of propaganda, and that if Hitler were alive today, he would be on the board of Netflix. I'm pretty sure about that. But
with a little twirly mustache and with lots of mustache wax, you know.
Yes.
No, that's exactly right. He's very stylish in a Chaplin-esque way. But Jason, any final questions in the last minute here for Tom Nichols?
Tom, do you think we're at danger of this war in Ukraine escalating to a point where it affects us here in the United States beyond the economic aspects?
I certainly hope not. I have friends who believe that it may boil down to a guerrilla war. I mean, that would be a best-case scenario. But I think that if we get involved, if we get into this war obsession mentality, we are going to be in so much trouble as a nation. It's just, it would be unspeakable. And I think that apparatus has to be stopped. I think that Americans have to make sure that Biden and company do not go down the merry war path, because it's not going to be merry. And, I mean, I wish I knew the future. I only know from these odd Russian and Ukrainian prophecies that I sometimes look at. These like mystics and saints don't have very nice things to sort of say about the future of Russia and Ukraine. That they do say that there's something down the road which is not too pleasant. But I tend to be positive, and I tend to want to think that.
Well, we're almost out of time. The music's going to play, so let's leave it on you saying the word positive. Tom Nichols, thanks so much for joining us. Fantastic appearance. Always great to talk to Tom. Thanks so much to Jason Goodman for co-hosting. And thanks to our first-time guest, Dimitri Babich. We'll be back tomorrow on the best damn radio show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. Biden announces ban on Russian oil and gas imports and says the rise of energy prices in U.S. will be Putin's price hike. President Joe, thank you.
I had to laugh.
No, thank you, Garland, for that chuckle. President Biden announced today that the U.S. will ban Russian energy imports. Quote, "We will not be subsidizing Putin's war," end quote. Biden said, calling the ban a powerful blow against Russia's ability to sustain its attack on Ukraine. And I guess we're not subsidizing Putin's war because we're subsidizing the Nazis that are in Ukraine fighting against him. But anyway, the ban will impact imports of Russian oil, liquefied natural gas, and coal. The latest sanction on Russia was first reported by Bloomberg. This sounds like what I call the politics of deflection. For insight into this, let's turn to our first guest. He's an associate professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, former president of the National Economics Association, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. As always, sir, welcome back.
Thank you.
Dr. Tauheed, two things here. First, this move follows discussions with European allies, but these countries may not join in the ban at this time, according to sources from Bloomberg. Biden says we're moving forward with this ban, understanding that many of our European allies and partners may not be in a position to join us. He said this noting the U.S. is much less reliant on Russian oil. But the first point, Dr. Tauheed, I thought the world was behind us. Also, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Venezuela and has now sent a group of officials to Caracas, and analysts believe the discussions center around looking to Venezuela to replace the Russian oil. Well, is he talking to Juan Guaido? I mean, who in the world? What is this? Makes absolutely, as the adage says from my mother-in-law, hard times will make a monkey eat snowballs. That's also an economic position. Dr. Linwood Tauheed, your thoughts, sir?
There is a serious amount of incoherence in this entire policy.
I'm sorry, I meant economic theorem. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, serious amount of incoherence. The last thing you mentioned, the negotiations with Venezuela to get them to increase their oil to the U.S. In 2019, the U.S. sanctioned Venezuela and increased its oil imports from Russia. Now it's wanting to go the opposite direction. I don't see why Maduro, except for business interests, would have any interest in increasing oil to the U.S. But if it does so, does that make Maduro a partner? Guaido certainly has no influence on this. That would make that possibly would make it a little harder to destabilize Venezuela. Although the incoherence means that anything could happen. The U.S. is not highly dependent on Russian oil. It's only 3% of oil imports, and the U.S. has a strategic reserve, which the release from the strategic reserve replaces about 1 month's supply of that Russian oil. And so, if things quiet down in Ukraine before then, because of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, then perhaps there won't be very much of an increase in the U.S. from Russian oil. Now the EU is different. The EU is about 33% of its oil comes from Russia, about 40% of its natural gas. And so if the EU were to involve itself in a sanction right now, it would be a complete disaster. What the EU has announced is that they're going to, by 2030, I believe, try to become less dependent on Russian oil. But this is a non-binding projection from the EU Commission. But because if the EU were to sanction Russian oil, we would have demonstrations in the street, and we may have those anyway, since there is a rise of nationalism in Europe that is significantly more than the rise of nationalism in the U.S. And the U.S. rise in nationalism is not insignificant because it led to the election of Donald Trump. So we can see political unrest and destabilization of EU governments if they go anywhere near a sanction of Russian oil.
So the other thing I think is this: there are the political ramifications. The President Biden, to say that this was a boneheaded mistake, I think, is the equivalent of saying that a tidal wave is moisture, because we know that right now that gas is on an upward trajectory. That the last few days, what we've seen is not the end of it,
and the prices are going up.
Right, exactly. So any upward prices now will be attributed to the statements that he made today, even if they were going to come anyway. So what he just did is he just said to America, anything that goes up from now, and that's going to be included to food, especially his political enemies, anything that goes up now, he just said, A, I own it, and B, it was a decision to make you suffer for these democracy, authoritarianism, or some kind of symbolic stuff that you don't even understand. I think this is a political miscalculation. I just find it unfathomable.
It's also a seasonable miscalculation, because here we sit in March, we're 2 months away from May, when refineries shift from their winter formulation to their summer formulation. Prices tend to go up around, just because there's less gas in the, no pun intended, pipeline. And then we're heading into the summer, when supply and demand starts to impact the price of gasoline. So to your point, Garland, Joe Biden made a number of miscalculations.
And everything's going up at any rate.
Go ahead, Linwood.
Well, it's in trying to think about why Biden would put himself politically in this position. I mean, his approval rating is down to 33%. Last month it was 37% before, so it's continuing to fall. There apparently has been no bump from this wartime presidency that he's trying to gin up, and the only thing that makes sense to me is that it doesn't matter to the major donors to the political parties, the military-industrial complex, and fossil fuel industry. Whether Biden is president, whether the Democrats keep Congress or not, or whether Republicans take over, it doesn't matter to them. They're still in the driver's seat. This is national policy that's being driven by big business, and otherwise, I would think that the Democrats would be concerned about the midterm election that's coming on, and about the eventual presidential election, but not being concerned about that means they have other concerns, and continuing to do what these donors want to do seems to be is the only reasonable explanation. There's an estimate that before the sanctions, inflation has added about $300 in monthly expenses to the average household. That's going to increase. And for low-wage households, a significant part of their income, not just in gas if they have cars, but also in the price of food, which is manufactured using energy, or in heating or air conditioning, those kinds of energy increases. will be quite devastating to the middle and working class. And so there will be a significant amount of pain that was already underway. And you're right, Joe Biden now owns this, whereas before he could have blamed it on supply chain problems outside of his control, but he now owns all of this.
Can you imagine the conversation between Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and Joe Biden when Maduro says, Senor Biden, first, you must return all of the gold that you stole. Second, you must apologize nationally to my country for all of the things that you've said and done. Third, you must relieve us of all of these sanctions. And fourth, you got to get Juan Guaido out of my country. I mean, I don't understand how anybody with any semblance, not only of sanity, but any sense of morality could go to this man and ask him for help.
Let me ask you this, and down that line, Dr. Tawhid, it reeks of desperation. You know what I mean? It reeks of his economic advisors saying, man, we in a world of deep and serious trouble. I almost said something different to trouble. We're in deep and serious trouble. You better call everybody you can. If you were his economic advisor right now, Dr. Tawhid, what would you be telling him?
As Tom Hayden said in The Godfather to Waltz, the president of the movie theater, Waltz said, I can't do this favor. Tell him to ask me something else. And Tom Hayden said, he never asks for a second favor when the first favor is refused. Go ahead.
Well, to dig a little deeper hole here, the U.S. administration is also approaching Iran.
Yes.
To increase their oil shipments to the U.S. And Iran, of course, is in a position to demand that Joe Biden bring back the agreement over nuclear energy. That Biden campaigned that he would bring back, but he's stalling on for some reason. And also to lift sanctions on Iran. So we have Venezuela and Iran. The only government that the U.S. is wanting to increase the oil that hasn't been sanctioned is Saudi Arabia. But this also, of course, puts Saudi Arabia in a better negotiating position, and perhaps to demand more to support its war in Yemen. And so all three of these countries, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Iran, have something to get from Joe Biden that he'll have to give them in order to increase oil production. By the way, Saudi Arabia is also becoming very, very friendly to Russia and China. And so this is a complex situation that it doesn't seem to me that the U.S. State Department is up to speed on dealing with.
But, you know, to your point, well, two things. One, on the Saudi Arabia side, that's going to cause Biden, I think, incredible domestic problems because of the immorality of that move. The murder and the decapitation of Jamal Khashoggi. And you promised us, Joe, during the campaign that you were going to bring an end to the war in Yemen. So he's got some incredible political problems there. And to the bigger point, when your policy isn't based in morality, then you really have problems in situations like this. If it was a moral-based policy, he could just do what's right, and there wouldn't be any conflict. Dr. Tawhid, we got a minute.
Yeah, yes, and there's also another drastic outcome, projected outcome from this is that the Federal Reserve is poised to increase interest rates in about another week. They were talking about doing 0.25%, but it's probably likely to be higher than that in order to deal with the increase in inflation because of the sanctions. We are I think we're very easily falling into a 1970s stagflation situation in which we had runaway inflation and increasing unemployment. That was possibly the worst economic situation for the U.S. Since the Great Depression, followed by the Great Recession, and that caused Jimmy Carter to lose his second term on the presidency.
What you just said brought another thought and question, and that is, so when you're talking about the Fed and increasing interest rates due to the supply chain issue and to deal with inflation, well, we've talked before about that's really the wrong solution to the problem, because that's a demand side solution to a supply side problem. The other question, if you could just quickly elaborate on how much of this has to do with the fact that we are a consumer-based economy, we are no longer an industrialized economy.
Well, when you're having to buy pretty much all of your manufactured goods from elsewhere, including a significant amount of those from China, it makes no sense to make China an enemy, which the Biden administration has been moving more towards, which in fact will push China closer to Russia, or maybe the other way around. Russia begins to depend on China more, begins to come out of the dollar-denominated trade system into the Chinese yuan-denominated trade system. So the quote, if unintended consequences, or the obvious consequences of this is to decrease the power of the U.S. globally, economically, and politically.
Dr. Linwood Tauheed, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that analysis. We look forward to having you back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Folks, you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik.
We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
If you go to raymcgovern.com, you'll see a piece entitled Starring Nuland and Pyatt in Their Own Words. It's a very interesting piece. You need to watch it and pay very close attention to it. And for insight, we're going to turn to our next guest. He's a former CIA analyst and co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And he's a panelist on this piece, Starring Nuland and Pyatt in Their Own Words. Ray McGovern. Ray, as always, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So, talk about this piece. You were part of a panel. John Mearsheimer was on the panel, and you were making the very point about the United States involvement in Ukraine and the United States responsibility for where we are now. Ray McGovern.
Well, I was privileged to be on with John Mearsheimer, noted, well, he's a political scientist, but is about the best one around. He teaches and has taught for many years at the University of Chicago. So he laid the groundwork simply by reciting and I say reciting because he had this right 6 years ago, a speech he gave saying, who's to blame for the Ukraine crisis? The United States and NATO are to blame for the Ukraine crisis, and I can prove it. So it was left to me to adapt my usual current intelligence routine, and listeners to the Critical Hour will know it well, stacking up the evidence as to how it became possible for Putin to lash out as he did in confidence that he had strong backing. And I use the metaphor of my own boyhood on the streets of the Bronx, where I was no slouch, but I was not